Since we have a quorum, I'm going to call this meeting to order at 6:07. Can everybody stand and say the pledge, please? For those who are in the room or watching online and are interested in letting any of their friends know, this is being recorded this evening, so the meeting will be recorded, so it can be watched later, and the documents have been posted online as well. And so at this point, I am going to turn this over to Mr. Levitan to talk about the ADA report.
Just talk? Okay, thanks. Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking the time today. So before the meeting, what we're going to do is, before the full board meeting, we wanted to have this session to just focus on ADA because it's a really important topic for the school district and really the town as a whole. Before I hand it over to Michelle, just wanted to say kind of how did we get here and kind of what was the goal. So last year when we were doing capital, Dan, Tony, and myself, really strategically going through. We also have Kimberly Castoro in our finance office, if you recall, building out 15-year plans. We've kind of gotten to a point where, we've merged our KDG plan with the town's 15-year plan and then our current needs. And one of those areas that we wanted to focus on was, ADA. We also heard last year in the budget process extensively that, really the priorities of looking at investment and where we've put a lot of dollars are HVAC, ADA, school security. And so on one of those pieces, the thought process was to build out a strategic investment plan is kind of the end goal for ADA across the school district. The main question being, what would it take to, basically get all of Greenwich Public Schools facilities to be ADA compliant? And we're talking about physical infrastructure. We're not talking about, programming or like inclusive type of spaces. This program was really just to focus on the building from the parking lot to the classroom. And what we did was we, reached out to our friends over at the First Selectmen's Advisory Committee for People with Disabilities. And we went out to bid for this project for someone to do an assessment. Through a competitive bid, we ended up with Silver Petroselli and Associates, who were the top candidate. They did an excellent job. They had previous experience doing ADA plans in the past like this. And what's been nice is Dan and myself, we also met with DPW and Parks and Recreation. And one of our goals here, and Steph will mention this too, is when we met with them, we want to build a cohesive structure on ADA. And so the contract was also supplemented by Parks and Recreation so that they could do an ADA assessment of all their facilities. And the goal here is we're using now the same vendor, we're speaking the same language, and we've come up with a rating system, for example, that will be consistent across multiple town entities so that when we have a priority one, we know priority one equals this across the whole entire town as we go to fight for capital dollars for different projects, and the town goes to make investments in ADA. So Silver Petroselli has come in, and it's been this was a really huge project, and it's, really big thanks Dan and his team and David Stein and really Michelle leading it, who you'll hear from, that have come in and, basically have gone through every single facility. And we really couldn't have done this without, Alan Gunsberg and especially Stephanie. Stephanie's been huge. She's been, involved, basically every part of the way and helping advising us on the whole project too. So the First Selectmen's Advisory Committee has really been a huge partner through this whole project. Today, you'll see from Michelle, she's going to run through, it's very detailed. There's a lot of information. The reason we're doing this separate from a business meeting is because of that. This is a significant topic and also a significant investment that the town would be making. We're talking about, the millions, the tens of millions of dollars, and multi-year effort that's going to take eventually coordination from our boards and other town boards, to basically get to the end goal. Today, we're talking about a first, draft of let's digest this information. This is the first time we're all looking at it. It's by no means, the end product. This is meant to be a community conversation. We also know we're going to want to engage, something we've talked about with Stephanie is that once the board kind of has seen this and we go through a few versions, we're going to want to engage the public, engage some of our other key stakeholders. What we have done here is put together something that's very formulaic, and it really just is meant to be like an X plus Y equals Z type of formula for ranking systems. There may be other factors that as we go to turn this into a 15-year capital plan or a 5-year capital plan, that we weigh here. But this is supposed to be our base where, okay, we now know what all the priorities are. We have a ranking system that was really intended to be just, take out any of the other programs or neighborhood concerns and just be, this is the condition of the building. This is the score for the different type of priority, and this is how the ranking would come out. We are adding Riverside. This is one of the reasons this is a draft plan. Riverside is not in the version that is here today. Originally, we excluded, obviously, Central Middle School in Old Greenwich, and New Lebanon for the reasons that are obvious. And then we had excluded Riverside at the time of this based on our outline for the building having its own major project. But that project was, although the feasibility is still in the capital plan, currently at the BET and the first selectman's draft budget or presented budget, it was moved out beyond the 5-year window, the actual 5-year, the actual funding for the project. So that indicates that it could be a much longer window. So it makes, more sense to have Riverside reflected into this plan. Western Middle School's in this plan too, but Western Middle School, if you may recall, was done earlier, and it was also done by SPA, and we have a number of capital dollars for projects there that we're linking up with this. We have included Western in. It was luckily the same company that won the bid, that had won the bid for Western, won the bid for this whole project, and it was easy to loop it in. But Western was actually done, and it's something that Stephanie's been working on for a really long time, for about 2 years with Dan's team to get that piece here, as Western has a lot of critical needs in it. That's really how we got, that's kind of like the background for why we did this. Stephanie, do you want to say something? I know she's been one of our key partners in this whole thing, so.
Thanks. I'm gonna come in. That's a good one.
Excellent.
I should have gotten up earlier. Thank you. As Blaze had said, this has really been a pleasure for the First Selectman Advisory Committee for people with disabilities to be involved. Alan and I have pretty much been, I think, in the beginning of when all of these school projects were starting, and really I really feel like we want to make sure that ADA is definitely for the forefront of becoming something that is being supported and a priority. And it's not just within the public schools, it's within the entire town. So we hope that it will be helpful. We don't want to be harmful. We want to make sure that everybody is understanding the need, the want, the desire, and obviously to be compliant with the law. I think that's the most important part of this entire thing, is that we need to follow the law. And I feel that there is a plan in front of us this evening that I hope you'll be happy with, understand the priorities and how they were determined. Again, this is the bare bones minimum of ADA that we're talking about. Priorities of entering the school in a safe manner, utilizing facilities, and getting into classrooms. So you're talking about the basics, but the basics are really the most important part to begin with. This is what is needed and this is the law. So I'm really also very thankful that they are going to utilize, Parks and Rec is going to utilize the same firm to handle their ADA transition plan, which gives tremendous synergies into the schools. So from the outside of the school, the places where the students will be utilizing facilities outside to the inside. So it's going to be a nice transition, at least for the projects themselves. So I look forward to having you see it. Western Middle School was a lot of fun with Dan. I think he's behind me or somewhere. Working with Michelle has been a pleasure as well. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. My name is Michelle Miller. I'm an architect and project manager with Silver Petroselli. I've been with them for about 10 years and I've done dozens of studies like this for districts and schools. So the purpose of this tonight is to ADA, it's a civil rights law, and we're looking to guarantee all equal opportunity to everyone. Title II enforces that government programs offer the programs and services to people with disabilities. So as everyone already explained, Greenwich hired us to identify these non-conforming issues at the 12 schools. Again, we're going to add Riverside as our 13th school. And really what we're looking to do is to provide associated costs to remove the barriers in place and help you create a master transition plan. And really the goal is to provide inclusive, equitable experiences at all your schools for everyone. I am on the slide that says project process. I don't know if you want to, I don't have a, I'm not used to not having the button. So basically what we do is we go into the school and we're usually guided with a custodian or someone from the facility department, and we look around at the conditions in each space. We take measurements on places that, we need to confirm certain things because there's requirements with an ADA on that. We review the floor plans and the dates of construction because really they tell us a story. We kind of know what we're going to start to see based on the age of the building. And we conduct these on-site evaluations to identify all of the issues. And then we prioritize that into 4 different categories. The first one is your approach and entrance. Can you get into the building from the moment you park your car to walking in? Then the second priority is access to goods. That's moving through the entire school. Can you open doors? Can you get to cabinetry? And then the third priority is your toilet rooms. Are they accessible? And then the fourth are things like drinking fountains and switches and telephones. And we're going to walk you through. You can go to the next slide. Sorry. Keep going. Okay, so this just kind of sums up the priorities, just so you know. It kind of breaks down some of the items we're going to be looking at. Again, parking is the van parking spaces there. Those are often not included. Is the accessible route to the main entrance there? The access to goods include your elevators. You're going to see some significant dollars associated with elevators through this process. Ramps and hand railings. We're looking at all these components. And we can go to the next slide. I just want to talk a minute about estimating. Estimating projects like this is not easy because we don't have documents that we can know exactly what we're doing, but we've done this enough that we use a lot of knowledge from bids that we've received. We've done this a lot. I did this probably 2 years ago. So we kind of take some of those prices and escalate that to move forward and do our best to make the most assumptions we can for these types of topics. What I do want to say is that you'll see each section, priority 1, 2, 3, and 4, but at the end, we add a lot onto that. We add general conditions, we add contingencies, and then soft costs, which really bring you to an actual project cost. And the only thing that we are not including are any escalation, because we don't know how long you plan to work this out, or hazardous materials. We don't have that information on your schools, so we can't really read the tea leaves on that exactly. Next slide. Oh, go ahead.
Are you also looking at access to the lunch lines and cafeteria areas?
Yes, we're looking at all the spaces throughout the building. You'll see some come up.
Can I?
So the next slide, oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, one quick question. Do we have a handout of this? Yeah, but it's only online. Okay, just with the numbers.
I don't have any
Okay, sorry.
handouts
Thank
with
you.
me.
Okay, no problem.
So this is a summary of the findings that we had. While it looks daunting, the red areas are areas where you're not conforming. It doesn't mean that every single item in that category isn't conforming, but there's something there that isn't. The green, obviously, you're good. And we're kind of totaling up all of the schools, and you can already see that this is going to be a $34 million scope here. And this is common. I want you to know that this is incredibly common. All districts are dealing with this. Schools were built mainly from the 50s to the 70s, so they all have these common issues. All right, now we're going to walk through each school, and I'll probably take longer at the beginning and then maybe speed up. But if anyone has questions or wants to slow me down, speed me up, let me know. So Cos Cob. An older school built in 1914, but it did receive major renovations in the 90s. So a lot of things were taken care of, but today we're in the 2010 ADA, so things have changed since 1992. So we do have some issues at Cos Cob. Moving on to priority 1. This summarizes that, there's no van compliant parking spaces. In the back of the school is a drop-off circle, and there's a stair up to the main building. There really should be a ramp there to provide direct access, so that's included. Priority 2. At Cos Cob, we have really thick walls, and a lot of those door jambs then interfere with the clearances we need around doors. So we flagged those. The signage is too low for the standards. And then some classrooms don't have accessible sinks. They're all too low and don't have the knee spaces within it. So we get over 109,000 there on priority 2. The bathrooms, the bathroom requirements have grown over the years. So when these were built in 1992, they no longer meet the requirements. So what we do say is that you don't have to fix all of them. It would add up really quickly. You need to at least fix 1 per grade, 1 per program, so that everyone has the opportunity. The nurse's toilet is another one that's common at a lot of the schools that those need to be addressed. There's some issues with clearances in what we call the gang toilet rooms, which are your larger toilet rooms. And then grab bars have changed since then. So that's another common one you'll see. So the final slide for Cos Cob kind of just summarizes all the estimates there into the priorities. So you can see we're at $1.1 million there. Moving on to Eastern Middle School. Built in 1954, but renovations in 1998. You can see that a lot of items have been addressed over the years. Priority 1, some simple things. There's some parking there, but no signage. It's required to have both the striping and the signage there. Stair handrail extensions, that's a common one that happens. The extensions are not correct. Moving on to priority 2. Now we're inside the building, moving around. Commonly, there's again, stair handrail heights and extensions are not correct. Doors here don't have all the clearances required. Another common one you'll see in schools where they pocket the doors in and now the clearances don't work. Cabinetry, insufficient knee spaces. The main office, there's no low area for someone checking in. Locker rooms don't have a compliant bench. Some signage isn't correct. There's a picture of the elevator at the time. Something was wrong with it, but they're obviously supposed to be level so that someone can ride in. So moving on to priority 3, most of your bathrooms have been addressed. We caught a couple that would need to be upgraded. I think we have 4 of them there. And then grab bars again throughout just need to be updated. Priority 4, there's a few non-compliant drinking fountains. As you can see, they don't have the forward approach needed. And then switches and thermostats, there's things like that that are out of the reach range. So Eastern Middle School sums up at 804,000. So moving on to Glenville. Glenville, built in 1975, renovated in 89, and then again in 2006, a major renovation. So most items are good here, but there's a few that aren't. There's no van compliant parking in the front, but everything else is great. They have ramps up. There is a lift inside when you enter. Priority 2. Some classrooms do not have an accessible sink. They're all too low and don't have the knee spaces. So we assumed 7 just to hit 1 per grade. And then there's no lower height at the main office counter there. In the restrooms, there's some child toilets. They're much lower and that has the valve in the way of the grab bar that you can see in the picture. So it breaks that grab bar up. They're supposed to be continuous. So the solution next to it, you're supposed to put the valve in the wall. That's why we architects don't really love the child height ones. They're difficult to work with. But Glenville's totals up to 244,000. Moving on to Greenwich High School. Yeah, whoops. Greenwich High School, I did have another architect work with me and we shared this school because at 500 and something square feet, we would have been there for days. So here, just a little thing on the entrance of obviously the main entrance is being constructed as we speak. So we couldn't evaluate that, but we're sure that one will work out. The entrance to the performing arts has a kind of meandering way in and it really, the ramp is over to the left and then over to the right, you'll see the push button on the brick wall. Really, it should be to the closest door just to provide direct access. So on priority 2, probably our biggest challenge here is that you have separate volumes in your school. So they need all separate elevators and all of these elevators are undersized. They have big, heavy doors in front of them that are hard for people to work with. So we are putting elevators at $1.2 million because you likely have to rebuild the whole shaft around it. And it's a lot of work to do that. So it's a big ticket item. Luckily, most everything else in Greenwich High School has really been taken care of. We found a few sinks in the art room. Moving on to priority 3, most of your bathrooms are renovated. We just found a couple with missing the vertical grab bars and missing the pipe wraps on your sinks. So some minor things. And then a few older drinking fountains. Again, most of them were upgraded or are upgraded. So unfortunately, it is a big ticket item with 5 elevators that need to be replaced, and it brings it to $10.6 million. Moving on to Hamilton Avenue. This school was renovated in 2008. So again, most of these items are pretty compliant. We had nothing on the exterior. So priority 1 was good. Priority 2, this was an interesting solution that they did here where the sink is offset from the knee space. And I kind of love it because they're trying to address both things, but it doesn't meet the code. It was a good idea, but not quite there. Signage is not compliant. It's an older style. And then the grab bars in the bathrooms are not compliant. And then again, we have some older drinking fountains within the classrooms. We assumed only replacing 8 of them. You don't have to go do every single one. So that brings the total of Hamilton Avenue to 207,000. Moving on to International School at Dundee. This is a pretty funky building in the 60s, the split levels. A lot of work has been done there to address that. There's some issues here though still. Priority 1, we have some ADA needs, getting the van parking in. The gym doesn't have the ADA parking, so getting that in over there. The entrance has some issues with the handrails. They're not at the compliant height or extensions. Moving on to priority 2, there's no access to the stage, which then opens on the music side of things too. So it's 2 kind of programs that don't have access to the stage there. Some of the handrails throughout the school are not compliant. Some doors, clearances around doors and doors within a series, you have to have certain spacing that isn't met. And in the report, we do show some graphics that try to explain some of these items to you in a little better than words can do. The graphics are pretty good. And insufficient knee spaces again, and signage is not compliant here. As you can see, there's no braille, and it's not compliant for today. There's some egress issues at the doors there with clearances. Moving on to the restrooms. Some of the restrooms are undersized. We assumed 5 of them that needed to be replaced. I always call the nurse's toilet out separately because that one's pretty important at every school. And then many of the student toilet rooms don't have the handicap stall that they need. So we have costs associated with that. And then priority 4, just some switches and thermostats that are out of reach range. So the total at Dundee comes to 1.7 million. Moving on to Julian Curtis. 1947 with renovations in 1952. This one we have some more issues at. The main entrance is obviously not compliant. We need a ramp on the side there. The door widths are also undersized, so this one's a tricky one. You really need to do an egress study to see if we can do a 3-foot door with a smaller door next to it. If not, making that wider will be awful, so you could always do a button there if need be, but both doors would have to open to get the clearances needed. Moving on to priority 2, we have no access to the stage. Handrail heights are not compliant. The sinks you can see are not compliant. And then one of the major ones is no elevator here. So this is one of the schools without an elevator. Priority 3, we have some kindergarten classrooms that are undersized. So those need to be modified. The nurse's toilet doesn't meet. There's some staff room toilets that do not have the required clearances. And then the restrooms on the second floor do not have a stall, compliant stall. And then the drinking fountains in priority 4. So Julian Curtis comes to 3.35 million. So moving on to Millbank School, we went to this one right after the high school, drastic difference in size there. They received some renovations in 2018, which was great for their front room with some nice cabinetry that was all compliant with sinks and everything. But this school is challenged with these really narrow hallways. Maneuvering clearances are not met at certain doors. This is a population that does have students in wheelchairs, and it was brought to our attention how difficult it is to move through there. There's some storage hooks where they're out of reach range. Exterior ramp. I will say that when you only rise 6 inches, you don't technically need handrails, but this population would really benefit from the handrails and should have them. There's no signage throughout the school either, so that was brought up. The bathrooms. The male bathroom just needs to remove their urinal. It's in the clearances, but it was also brought up that they really need a lift there. So the bathrooms would need to be reconfigured to allow for a lift in there. So we included a cost for that. So the conceptual estimates there are $371,000. Next is North Mianus. This is similar to Julian Curtis, the entry. The doors are too small, same type of stair, it needs a ramp. So there's some parking ADA issues there. Priority 2, this one, it does have the serving line was actually too narrow, but which you brought up. It's under the required 36 inches, I believe. We have some stair handrail. You can see the profile of that wooden one. It's a 1970s thing that is no longer compliant. The existing elevator here is undersized for ADA today, so that one would need to be rebuilt. Some classrooms don't have accessible sinks. You can see that there. And just about every egress door has some steps out. Priority 3, the classrooms are undersized, so we're counting 5 of them there. The nurse's toilet is also undersized, and then many don't have a handicap stall. Priority 4, we have some non-compliant drinking fountains, and then again, switches and thermostats out of reach. North Mianus totals at 3.39 million. Next, we have North Street School. So ADA parking does not include a van. So you just need restriping and signage. Priority 2, most the classroom doors are under 3 feet, so you do not get a 32-inch clear opening. So those doors need to be enlarged and reworked. They also, some have knobs that require twisting. Those are no longer compliant. Some don't have the accessible sinks or insufficient knee space. There's also no lift to the stage. And then a lot of the egress doors have steps out of them. Yes.
So I'm a mom at North Street. I will tell you that the ADA parking is so far away from the entrance of the school. It is tremendously inconvenient for any family that has a child with mobility issues. I think it could be remedied very easily by having the principal just move over one spot. And, you know, I think it should be a consideration because it's very
Okay.
far from the entrance.
That's good. Thank you. We can include that moving forward. I mean, restriping is not not a big ticket item, so we can include that. So North Street is 2.36 million. Now we're moving on to Parkway. Another 50s school, renovations in the 70s. Some modifications to the ADA parking is needed there. The entry ramp only has a handrail on one side and it doesn't have the correct extensions, so we need that modified. Priority 2, we have some stair handrail height and extension issues. I mean, I think the stair is only at the stage there. Doors, again, don't have the required width. They don't have the required maneuvering clearances, and some have knobs. There's insufficient knee space height at sinks throughout the school. And then again, we have some exterior doors that have greater transitions than needed. Priority 3 is the toilet rooms. You can see here we have really tiny toilet rooms in the classrooms, so some of those need to be enlarged to meet ADA. And then grab bars throughout the school. And then priority 4 is your drinking fountains. So we have Parkway at 1.65 million. So now we are at Western Middle School, and just to give a little more history on that, we did first do our first draft at Western Middle School in 2020. We were brought back to study it in greater detail, and that's where I first met Stephanie. We studied, where an elevator should go and all sorts of components. So we have a little bit of more detailed estimating here and some preliminary plans that we're just starting to work off of now. So I'm sure many of you know Western Middle School. It's built into the hillside. It's steps. You have to walk up rise about 10 feet just to get to the main entrance, those stairs. And then you get there in the classroom wings, you have to go up or down and there's no elevator. So, but priority 1 is just the main entrance and parking. The parking is pretty far away because you go in over by the auditorium. We want to get people into the front door. So we need to bring parking closer to the front door. So you can see a little site plan that shows a ramp. It has to be an L ramp to get up that 10 feet. And we brought some parking closer there. Priority, it has a 2A because we started to break up these priorities as we were getting into it previously. So priority 2A is the elevators. There is one elevator in the W wing, but that one is undersized. So we're looking at 2 elevators here. The first one is going to take some modifications to take a little piece of the classroom away, and you probably can't see that very well, but right at the stairs, we're putting in a little lobby to an elevator that would connect this wing. And then moving down that corridor, we would enlarge the other elevator at the end of the W wing there. Priority 2, we're looking at a lot of other pieces. You can see on priority 2, you can see the door clearances. Those are some of the things I was referencing. When they're pocketed, you don't have those clearances. We have science rooms now that don't have sinks, bathrooms here. This one's a lot longer and I can't even read this list right now, but it's the common things that I've been mentioning along at all the other schools. And then priority 3 are your toilet rooms. Many of them have been renovated. There's a few, including the nurses, that's undersized. So that one is really at the top of the list, and a few others. And then it's just kind of minor grab bar things throughout. Priority 4 are your drinking fountains. We also listed eye wash stations there. And then some pathways. We put the exterior pathways at the end there. So this one was done slightly different than the other ones, but for the most part in the same process. So Western Middle School then sums up at 8.27 million. Our next slide kind of just stacks the schools in order of, highest to lowest cost. We're trying to highlight the priorities in that graph, showing you that everything's totaling at 34.1 million. The next slide, you can see we listed out by the priorities, so you can really see where the costs fall. And you can see 71% of all of this is in your priority too, because it's throughout all the schools, many areas. So then our final slide right now is how we're looking at ranking it. We looked at a few different approaches, and really it's just simple to add 1 point for each red line, each red box where something's failing, and put that in order, which one has the most needs. And that puts Western Middle School at the top, then North Miami, Julian Curtis, and that it makes sense with the elevators too, moving down. So we know that this is a lot to take in, and it's going to take time to kind of map this out, but we wanted to help you try to look at the best way to approach it. We do believe the approach per school is better, much more easier for you all to manage. Oh, and I guess, yeah, I should have went to the next final slide here. So, we do these as a steering document to help aid your next step, but your next step would be to really implement these school by school. We really hope that our spreadsheets are helping you budget that. And really the next thing you would need to do is execute these projects, hire someone to start drawings and specs and get a shovel-ready project and bid and implement these. At that point too, you can involve the building official, your 504 coordinator, because sometimes they might look at something differently and want to, there's working in different towns, you hear different things. So it's really, they make the final call. That's it for now. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is really in depth, and I didn't get a chance to go through the 130-page report that went with this, but I started to.
Okay.
So I look forward to getting in there. And you answered one of my questions already, which was why we hadn't included Riverside. And I know Old Greenwich had a feasibility. It was done during their feasibility, but I was just curious because we didn't have Windrose or Havemeyer in here either. So are you going to add either of those facilities with Riverside, or this is something we can discuss? We don't know Windrose. Okay, well, just checking. Yeah, and anyway, and so we can talk about also adding Havemeyer, but the other question was, I was just curious as to how you determined the priorities.
It's actually dictated by a guide. Gosh, the name is in my report and I'm drawing a blank on it, but oh man, I'm gonna grab it. Sorry. It's a document that's widely used. It's that follows ADA. It's gonna be right here. I'm sorry. I thought it was gonna be right here. There's a checklist that I've used. It's the Institute for Human-Centered Design ADA checklist for existing buildings. They're the ones that kind of set that approach, which is similar. ADA kind of maps that out also a little bit differently. We like the 4 categories. It really makes sense to us. And it does make sense. You need to get in the building first. So it kind of walks you through getting in the building, then moving through the building, going to the bathroom and all the other needs like that. So we did not invent the priorities.
Thank you. I just figured I'd ask because it wasn't
Yep.
exactly clear.
It is in the report, so.
And
Wait,
I wanted
Liz
to
looks like he
just,
wants to jump in.
if I could jump in too. So thank you, Michelle. That was excellent. And don't go too far because I think more technical questions are all for you. But just to give some more Greenwich specific kind of clarifying on next steps, what this is, obviously we have to finish. We still have to do Riverside. And then this is just a ton of information that you can't digest in one night. That's why we were kind of doing this separately. The actual detailed report is very in depth. The goal for this would be basically to start taking this document. We now have a very thoughtful and mapped out prioritized ranking of all of the issues by building. And we have a kind of defendable and logical approach to how we came up with those. But we still need to turn this plan ultimately into how Greenwich does it. And we have the good data here. This really would be like our baseline for how we would go forward. Ultimately, I could really see like either a subcommittee. This is like, a huge project and it's extremely important. It's the law. And it's a law from the early 90s. And we are talking about a lot of money. So I could see really like a subcommittee or even a joint committee between this board and the BET, maybe liaisons from the budget committees of different groups, because really turning this into, this is a multi-year plan. We're talking about, just from Michelle and her professional team's estimates, over $30 million. But the goal here is to give decision makers the data, the raw data, so that we can then turn it into something. We really have been stuck treating something Dan and I have talked about at length, and you can articulate it differently, but kind of treating ADA as reactionary or almost as a whack-a-mole type of approach, where we know there's this piece here, or because we're stuck in this cycle of, well, this kid is coming into X school and we have to take care of it now. And so Dan's team kind of gets wrapped up in constantly having to address ADA from the issue of that topic for that specific kid. And the goal here was to make it so that we would have like a systematic, forward-thinking approach to a multi-year plan if you were just going to focus on ADA. For you as decision makers, there's also a lot of other overlapping pieces in our overall capital plan. So this really is a tool, and it's why I think, Cody's expressed, and Kathleen also, some interest at some point in maybe a more time for the budget committee to look at some of these things, because the time frame that we often do this in is just way too condensed when we're talking about how many layers are going to be overlapping with different ADA projects. Some of these ADA projects are restriping important signage and things we can do with existing operating funds, repaint. Other ones are resizing elevator shafts and are talking about bunch of other projects that are going to be impacted, likely HVAC projects and other projects throughout the building that we might have if we're going to be doing multi-million-dollar, renovations of large scale like that. Michelle had alluded to a comment. She said really going by school. And that's because what we had talked about at length is, do we take this approach where, Parks, let's say Parks uses the same terminology, and then DPW has a program which is sidewalks. And there's two pieces to think about. One would be, do we want to just make all of our schools to start? Is it better to make everything level 2? So everyone is at least at a baseline level of priority across the whole district, or is it better to do a school by school, this is what our standard is, which is fairly simple. It's the law. And we're going to go and do it building by building over X number of years through X number. What we have now is a plan where we can have stable, predictable investments over a period of time where we're actually at least making inroads that are meaningful. The reason we were advising against it is when we're talking about, if we're going to mobilize contractors across multiple locations in multiple years, it's likely not going to make sense to have those mobilizations just to get to something that still is ultimately non-compliant. And you're going to have a lot of extra mobilization and labor cost if you're constantly kind of, okay, let's get to level 2 here, level 2 here, level 2 here, level 2 here. We just went through the whole place. Now we're all level 2 compliant. We have to go back. But there will be some larger conversations with the whole town about how we want to do that. Because the other thing ultimately that I think is maybe more of something that we've been talking about and for years in my different capacities in town would be, if we're all talking through ADA investment, and Stephanie alluded to this, when we get to the town, well, if DPW is, let's just take the Byram neighborhood and we're going to do sidewalks. Let's just take any neighborhood. We're going to do the sidewalks over here, and Parks is going to do a project in that same area, and we're going to do our schools, and we start to create zones of the town, and we're maybe mobilizing, this was extremely cost effective for Parks and Rec to use an existing contract that we had, and we're not reinventing the wheel. Strategically, as a town, we can take a look at, okay, we're going to make these parks and sidewalks, systematically, so whole experiences of the town are ADA compliant, rather than, the long-term kind of vision would be, rather than, the sidewalks over on the east end of town are getting made compliant, and then the school on this end of the town, and then the park in the backcountry is first being prioritized. Ultimately, we want to combine it so that there's an experience for people so that they can access our facilities and our services. And then we're also thoughtfully making those investments as a town. And there might be a lot of savings where the Board of Ed controls the property, right? And then Parks is doing something or DPW is doing something, and we both need to do pathways. And we would probably save money if we bid out a whole section and we're all doing ADA sidewalk pathways in one area of town. And so the goal, the kind of the vision of doing it this way and doing it with some of the other departments would be, so we all have the same baseline tool, and then we can all speak the same language. So we know that this really needs to then be turned into a capital plan, and how we kind of want to do that. There's multiple different ways to do it. We also know that this is a lot of information and a lot of money. And we know that we're talking about likely what is a multi-year strategic investment plan. So I just wanted to give some extra background of kind of how we would see this as a tool for the decision makers. We were kind of operating in the dark, let's say, without having this full picture of where are the gaps in every single one of our facilities. And let's have an expert that is, does this as their specialty to do it. So that's kind of just some background on how you would take this and maybe implement it.
So I had a question about Windrose, since the folks from Windrose just walked in. That was not part of the presentation, nor was Havemeyer.
No, Havemeyer was excluded for the same reasons at the time at Riverside. And it's in line with the first selectman's plan at the time. It's also I would say prioritize outside of Havemeyer, the educational facilities that are in critical need, but it's up in the air. So we just didn't want it to get caught in the that piece of it, but it's a good point. And it's also not something that we can't add as an add-on service to the project. Just like we're adding Riverside as an ad service based on changing information, it would be something that Michelle's team could easily do an ad service on.
I think
Windrose, though.
we don't know, Dr. Jones, when I'd asked, it said, we don't own Windrose, so we can't. I
So
guess
even
it's not
though
much we
we
can-
have programming there, we don't.
It's something that would not be in the scope of this report, but there's a lot of, I do want to be really clear, because I know that Alan has spoken to me about this multiple times over the years, and this is very limited in the scope to physical infrastructure of the buildings we own. There are so many other pieces of both accessibility and special education that do not involve ADA compliance of the building. And we're really only talking about capital investment in ADA. There's all kinds of, because even when we were doing the RFP process, we had to make sure that we kept the scope very specific for bidders. Because you really can go there's all kinds of, once you get into programming and services and different definitions of spaces, there's a whole nother range of things that open up, and there's a whole nother conversation that can be had. So we're really just focusing on compliance with the law of the physical infrastructure of our buildings as a starting point. Right? Am I wording that properly?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I know this is a lot to digest, and I just didn't, if anybody has any other specific questions for right now, only in the fact that we have our next meeting coming up in a few minutes. So I don't know if anybody has specific questions for now, or they want to digest. Sophie?
I'm just curious if you could speak to kind of what you talked about, I love the idea of being methodical and efficient and going school by school, but the flip side of that is, right, like what is the experience of our students who would benefit from an ADA accessible school right now, right? And the sort of the whack-a-mole question, right? So I don't know if you can speak to that, of how other school districts have kind of done that balance of like, how do you do an efficient, methodical approach and yet also try to meet the needs of your students right now who are, their education is being compromised because they're in buildings that don't meet their needs.
and I'll let Michelle answer on other districts. I want to make sure I understand. It's that, you know, we could turn this into 30 years to get, like, we could come up with a 30-year plan to achieve compliance and generations worth of students that went through. Whereas, and I think what we're going to get to, and Michelle, I'll have you talk about what other places have done. But one of the questions as decision makers, now that we're going to have the data, and it's why I think we'll end up wanting to loop in, like the finance board, for example, is it better to, when we know what the prioritization is, just do a one-time investment in ADA, you know, across the whole school district? I mean, at the end of the day, these are the questions that we're going to have. Do we want to just make everyone X compliant and do a one-time rip off the Band-Aid and we bring all our facilities up? Do we want to do a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan? You know, I think when we start talking about, there is reasonable things that we just had a conversation. Okay, when you're talking about things, there is some capacity that can be reasonably executed within a certain time frame. It's not like we can do $30 million worth of ADA construction and take every school offline in a year. But we're going to need to balance the multi-year impact. And it is one of the reasons, and Michelle, you can answer the other questions. Why did we talk about, is it better to do all level 1? Because do we want all of our schools to at least have access so that people can get inside the school of their choice? And it's going to be a tricky question that I think we'll have other folks weigh in a little bit more on, but I know we're tight on time, but do you want to answer about other places?
So it's interesting. Other places, a few towns that I've done, they tend to go priority 1, 2, 3, 4 with their work. But the schools I've worked with tend to go school by school. And I think a lot of that is because of the Office of School Construction. They're usually going for grants and you have to do those. So they're going to usually go school by school.
Okay, okay. Michelle just brought up probably the most important point, especially if there's any BET members listening. But what we have taught, all of this work is obviously reimbursable through the state school construction program. And that's very significant, obviously. It's a renovation. So we're talking for us in Greenwich here, we're talking the 20% reimbursement number, not the 10%. So what will be important about that, and we talked about this, I think, is, do we take an existing committee? What we don't want to have is 16 ADA building committees.
Right.
What we can do, and what other places do. Yes, I don't think anyone here wants to have that. But what we can do is either have existing committees, or where there's some shared membership, or one committee appointed as an ADA building committee. And how that might work with the charter language is maybe they have to be appointed to each project, you know, by the RTM, for example. But we can use this, hopefully we get to a point where we have one committee where we tackle all of these projects. And then when we file a reimbursement, we don't have to, you know, we can mobilize one vendor potentially, and we can start bidding out more broadly.
I was just going to take a note because it's 7 PM. And for those individuals from the public who are tuning in now and wondering if they missed the start of our meeting, we had a 6 o'clock meeting to discuss the ADA study that was done of all these school facilities, which was recorded, and you can certainly watch that online. We will be getting to our actual business meeting in a few moments after we wrap this up. Do any other members have any specific questions? I was going to suggest that once the board members have an opportunity to sort of go through this document and have some thoughts, I think we should put together a list of questions to send over as a group, if that would be helpful. And one of the other thoughts, other than adding, which, you know, both Laura and I had suggested as well, adding Havemeyer in when you guys are also adding Riverside, that would be very helpful. And I think once we start to look at this for priorities, I think safety and security is also kind of key when we're talking about entrances. Making them accessible, but also safe is exceptionally key when we're talking about the schools that need man traps and things like that. So maybe we could just add a column from our other stuff. So I mean, just to add it, if we're looking at priorities, I think that is key for us discussing school by school versus bringing things to level 1 as well. Because if you're going to make the entrance, if you're touching the entrance, you might as well make it secure as well. So just my 10 cents.
Accessible and secure. Yep. So I would say, yeah, any questions, send them over, draft report. We have the team. We'll take a look at, but we'll get a quote for an ad service to see what it looks like. And really want to thank Michelle. Her team did a lot of work on this walking through the facilities, as well as Dan's team. They also walked through every building with Michelle's team. And then obviously Alan and Stephanie have been literally since the RFP, and also colleagues at the town in Parks and Rec have also, everyone's been great partners, and really a really exciting product could come out of this. And it's something that this is how we're looking at kind of capital. I think Karen, you brought up a good point. We need to build all these systems kind of across capital. It's why you see Dan, we had put in the request for the underground infrastructure to kind of do something similar, where we start taking a look at the infrastructure and then build out these plans, multi-year, and then you have the tools to make better decisions about prioritization. So huge project, and just really want to thank everybody, and for all the work that they've done on it. So
You stole my thunder. I was going to
sorry.
say thank you. No, I was going to say thank you. This is a long time coming. This is something that we started to look at back when we had the first master facility plan, but it didn't go this deep. And we've certainly been looking to do this for quite some time. We're a little behind the times in some areas. So I really appreciate all the hard work that was put in, and we'll be coming down the road from all those involved to get our schools back to be
You
compliant
brought
and
up
what they
one
want.
point that might be confusing, and I think that's a really good point, which is how this relates to the ADA numbers that maybe were in the KDG plan. The KDG plan was a master plan for the whole district, and it involved major renovations across the whole entire school district. And so dollar amounts that might be in that plan specific to ADA, Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that was in relation to doing major renovations. It was the whole plan. And so it would be like, okay, if you're going to rebuild Riverside, you're going to do Old Greenwich, you're going to do all these things. We're also going to do this. The lens of this project was not that. This was, okay, this is kind of where we are today. And this is what it would look like if you just wanted to do ADA compliance. And I know sometimes people get tripped up on that KDG number that was in there. And that was a good way to look at it. But this is a look at just everything compliant, not taking into consideration doing $30 million renovations kind of here, and here over multi-year. So
I was saying this is one of the major priorities that we looked at when we did the master facility
Yes.
plan, but not the entire master facility plan. That's why it said safety and
In related,
security.
yes.
At least the entrance ways are the things we should be considering when we're talking about the entrances. But that's another small piece that was from the master facility plan, which is a separate
'Cause you'll see,
document.
like,
Those
that-
numbers could be stale by
I
now.
think that ADA number that's specific to ADA is like only 3 or 4 million in KDG. But what that is that's in relation to doing all the other construction projects. So it's actually also a very large number, but you would be doing all of these other things. So that's why that's like 4 million and this is 34 million. Wasn't that Michelle just went crazy and just,
Because if you renovate, you're going to code.
yes, when you renovate, you go to code. So thank you.
So with that, we are going to end our 6 o'clock meeting and begin the 7 o'clock meeting. I don't think we have to adjourn the first one.
You do have to adjourn it because
do.
it was a special meeting, Chair Hirsch. I'm over
All
on the
right.
TV.
So do I have a
You
motion to
end this
adjourn?
meeting with the motion. And then
Okay.
anyone in the room or at home that is watching online has to end the meeting and go to the 7 PM meeting because there's separate links. And then you would start that meeting anew with calling to order.
Perfect. Okay, well, I know, I just looked, I was like, there's this, there's a voiceless, a bodiless voice. So would anybody like to make the motion? Thank you. Michael Joseph, second, anyone? Okay, all in favor? Okay, that is a 7-0 to adjourn at 7:06. So log off this link if you're on it and log back onto the meeting to begin at 7 o'clock, which we're running a few minutes behind.